KG. I'm John Sullivan, KG7WFQ. I'm coming to you from Mukilteo, Washington. I'm an amateur extra class. I was first licensed back in 2015. And I'm going to be covering some safety topics this afternoon for the next 20 or so minutes. I'm going to cover two main topics. T0A, which is power circuits and hazards, and T0B, which is antenna safety. And then I believe JD Shaw is going to be covering the third safety topic, RF hazards, after that. 36 of the 412 questions in the pool relate to safety. The exam will have a total of 3 questions from these 3 topics, but not necessarily one from each. As with all of our topics and classes, attending these classes is not going to be enough to ensure that you're going to pass the technician exam. You should expect to spend probably at least 8 to 10 hours of outside study, and would strongly recommend using the hamstudy.org tool and in the study mode first before you start doing practice exams, and then try the practice exams. The power and circuits hazard has a number of subtopics: hazardous voltage, fuses and circuit breakers, grounding, electrical code compliance, lightning protection, and battery safety. And the antenna safety has several subtopics as well: tower safety and grounding, installing antennas, and antenna supports. First thing we're going to talk about is power circuits and hazards. Got a short little video here.
Wires, and I can't even feel it because the voltage is not high enough. Wow, this is wild. You can see how far this gap is quite wide. Let me measure it for you. Some toothpaste and you're ready to go. It's a very simple and yet effective circuit. Let's turn it on. The skin here is quite sensitive to temperature, and you can tell the temperature quite accurately. This is not the best way, and you might like to try a safer way. Oh, and don't drop the iron on your pants. It's almost finished now. Just need another piece of wire. What did I do?
What the fuck did you do?
I'm fine, thanks.
Well, that's an idea of some things we probably shouldn't be doing from a safety standpoint. Here's a picture of a hydrogen gas explosion. This was formerly a large computer data center with battery room and emergency generators in Sacramento, California. The company vacated the building and moved out the computer equipment, but they left the battery backup system behind. The ventilation for the room appears to have been tied to a hydrogen monitoring system, and the sensor was in the alarm status when the emergency responders arrived to the scene. However, apparently the alarm was just a local alarm, so it never notified anybody, and it was kind of useless. But this is an effect of a hydrogen gas explosion from batteries, from storage batteries. We're going to talk about battery safety. This is kind of an example of proper RF grounding for a station. You'll notice the ground rod and the ground bus. It's important that you use heavy gauge copper braid or foil to connect items to the bus and keep the run lengths to a minimum. So that's a pretty good example there. Lightning arresters. Lightning arresters, as it says here, should be installed on a grounded panel near where the feed lines enter the building. We tend to not think about lightning protection so much here in Western Washington as in other parts of the country, but it is still important. It protects the equipment from the power surge from the lightning traveling down the coax feed line. So that's why they need to be prior to entering the building. You want to have the lightning arresters there, and it needs to be ground with the most direct path to ground that you can have. Some quick acronyms, definitions you're going to see in these questions: AC alternating current, FAA, Federal Aviation Administration, and so forth. I think you just take a quick look at those, won't dwell on them. Okay, so I'm going to be going through the questions in a different order than they're listed in the question pool. I've tried to group them together more generally by their subtopic. So we'll start with some questions about electricity hazards. The first is question alpha 2. What health hazard is presented by electric current flowing through the body? Current flows through anything. It's going to meet resistance. It's going to generate heat, so it will cause injury by heating tissue. Can also disrupt the electrical functions of the cells, and it may cause involuntary muscle contraction. So all of these are correct answers. All of the above. The next two questions relate to battery safety. Which of the following is a safety hazard of a 12-volt storage battery? We're talking about your typical lead acid battery. And this is a little bit tricky here. Touching both terminals with hands may cause an electric shock, which would seem to be a good answer. Shorting the terminals can cause burns, fire, or an explosion. We saw in that video where some circuits were shorted and causing fire. That certainly will happen with a battery terminal. And RF emissions from a nearby transmitter can cause the electrolyte to emit a poison gas. That is not correct. That does not happen. So it's not all three answers. So you're narrowed down to A and B. And the best answer in this case is shorting the terminals can cause burns, fire, or an explosion. What hazard is caused by charging or discharging a battery too quickly? I talked about that incident in Sacramento. That was hydrogen gas that got generated, outgassing from the batteries. That is the correct answer, overheating or outgassing. Next questions are about fuses and circuit breakers and AC power. So what is the purpose of a fuse in an electrical circuit? Well, it's just like a fuse. You think about it at home, what happens if it gets overloaded? It cuts off the power, right? So you're going to remove power in case of an overload. It doesn't limit current to prevent shocks. It's current's going to flow at a certain, up to a certain limit. And this whole thing about power supply ripple is kind of a red herring. So the real answer is remove power in case of an overload. Answer B. Why should a 5-amp fuse never be replaced with a 20-amp fuse? Okay. Well, again, this is one of these, all of these choices are correct. So if anyone's wrong, it's going to eliminate that one. It says a larger fuse will be likely to blow because it is rated for a higher current. No, that's the exact opposite. It's rated for a higher current. It's not going to blow until the current gets above the 20-amp limit on the fuse. So it's less likely to blow than the 5-amp would be. So that eliminates both A and D. We've got this power supply ripple red herring question again, and the answer is excessive current could cause a fire. Excessive current, it's going to heat up the wiring, and if the capacity of the wiring is much lower than the current going through, you can end up with a fire. So that is the answer, C. Where should a fuse or circuit breaker be installed in a 120-volt AC power line? Well, two of these answers say in series, two say in parallel. Well, you don't want to put your fuse in parallel with the circuit because then there's a path around the fuse and it doesn't serve a useful function. So it's going to be in series, and the question is it with a hot conductor only or in series with the hot and neutral conductors? And the correct answer is in series with the hot conductor only. Okay. What is a good way to guard against electrical shock at your station? Use 3-wire cords and plugs for all your AC powered equipment. Yes, you do want to do that. Just as you do with all your other appliances and things at home, you want to use your 3-wire AC power cords. Connect all AC powered station equipment to a common safety ground. And those illustrations I showed at the beginning of your grounding all your equipment onto a ground bus, that is correct. You do want to do that. Have all your station equipment grounded to a common safety ground. So that's 2 of the 3 are correct. So the only question is the third one, if there's 2 correct answers, then probably it's going to be all of these are correct. And that is right, because installing mechanical interlocks in a high voltage circuit is also a good safety measure. That way, if, for instance, if there's a cover, if it opens up, the interlock will cut power off so that you won't have a live circuit, a high voltage circuit, once you open the cover of a cabinet, for example. So in this case, all 3 choices are correct answers. In the United States, what circuit does black wire insulation indicate in a 3-wire 120 volt cable? This is an AC 120 volt AC cable. Well, black is a color that's used. The answer is it's the hot wire. In DC circuits, you think about, usually you're going to have black is going to be minus or ground, and red is going to be typically your hot wire. In AC wiring, black is hot, white is neutral, green is ground. You can remember green is ground, 2 G's, green is ground, and black is your hot line on an AC circuit.
John, you got a question in chat.
Okay, I cannot see chat.
Kathy is confused about the difference between parallel and series. She wants to know if there's an easy way to remember those.
If there's an easy way, if something is in parallel with something else, they're both going to have current can flow through both of them at the same time independently. If they're in series, current has to go through one to get to the other. Think of them as being straight in line with each other as opposed to next to each other. Does that help?
Yeah, Kathy,
Yes, that's helpful.
Okay.
Kathy, think of the world.
So John, another way I think about it is in terms of Christmas lights. In the old style Christmas lights, you were in series. So if any one light bulb burned out, the whole light string you had to check to find out which one broke, because the current flows through each one after the other. And that's series. Parallel is the new style Christmas lights, where if one goes out, all the other ones stay on. And the reason why is because the current is wired in such a way that it can go through either one in parallel and not affect the other ones. So
Yeah, that's a great illustration.
So Kathy, also think of baseball, the World Series, they play the games consecutively as opposed to in parallel.
Okay, the baseball one goes over my head, but the Christmas light one definitely makes sense.
Right. All righty. We had earlier, there were 2 questions about batteries. This is the one question in the pool about power supplies. What hazard exists in a power supply immediately after turning it off? You may sort of have to memorize this. I think components were covered in an earlier class. I didn't attend that, but I assume discussion of capacitors happened. Capacitors store an electric charge, and then they discharge it, and it can drain over time. So the answer to this one is D. You're concerned about the charge stored in the capacitors, because if you turn the power supply off and there's still a charge in the capacitors, if you were to touch the lead to the capacitor, you could get an electric shock. That's probably the easiest way to remember it. And this is the one question about safety and test equipment. Which of the following precautions should be taken when measuring high voltage with a voltmeter? The answer is ensure that the voltmeter and the leads are rated for use at the voltages to be measured. You want to make sure that your equipment you're using is the proper equipment for what you're about to use it for, that they're rated for the type of current they're going to see, or the voltage it's going to see. Ensuring that it has low impedance has nothing to do, it's irrelevant. Ensuring that the circuit is grounded through the voltmeter, well, that's not the case. You're not going to be using the voltmeter as a ground. And you don't set voltmeters to a frequency. So the correct answer is that you want to make sure that your voltmeter and the leads are rated for use at those voltages. If it's designed for a low voltage circuit and you use it on a high voltage circuit, you're going to burn it out. That's the bottom line there. Okay. The last two questions in this section relate to hazards with antennas and feed lines, and they tie into the first questions in the next section. So where should a lightning arrestor be installed in a coaxial feed line? Showed that picture at the beginning, that lightning arrestors belong on a grounded panel near where the feed lines enter the building. You want to keep the lightning out of the building. So connecting it to the output of a transceiver, it's too late at that point. Your lightning is in the building, right? Also, if you do it at the antenna feed point, which is where the feed line goes into the antenna, you've got a whole length of coax coming to the building that could be what gets struck by lightning, and it's not going to have any protection. And the AC power service panel is unrelated to this. So it's on a grounded panel near where the feed lines enter the building. And what should be done to all external ground rods or earth connectors? We're going to talk a little more about this in this next section as well. But you want everything to be at a common ground, everything grounded together and bonded together so that everything is at the same potential. So the answer to this is C. You want to bond them together with a heavy wire or conductive strap. You want to have a good connection to each of the external ground rods so that they are all at the same potential. Which leads us into the antenna safety module. We're going to be looking at crank-up towers. This is what a crank-up tower that we're talking about, where the sections literally get cranked up to a higher, got some kind of a wire rope in the middle of it that you crank it and it elevates the sections in turn. And we're going to be concerned somewhat about tower work and the safety precautions you want to take when working with a tower. You can see up here in the upper left there, we've got a tower close to what appears to be a power line, and we're going to talk about that as well. Getting back to the grounding, we're talking about a tower base being grounded. You can see that better illustration is on the right side there. You see 3 ground rods, 8 feet long, and 8 feet is the magic number. They're driven into the ground. You can see that there's a grounding wire from the rod to the tower leg. And then there is some sort of a grounding wire or strap in a circle, a ring around there, connecting each of the ground rods together. That's what we're talking about, that they are all bonded together to form one circuit, if you will. All right, so the first 4 questions are continuation of this question of grounding and lightning safety. Which of the following is a good practice when installing ground wires on a tower for lightning protection? Okay. Remember early on, I said you wanted to have, when talked about the grounding bus for the station, we wanted to have short direct leads. Well, that's what you always want with grounding connections that are short and direct. The answer is C. B is the opposite of that. And this drip loop is unrelated to what we're talking about on grounding. Okay. Which is a proper grounding method for a tower? Remember I said the magic number is 8. So the answer is going to be D. separate 8-foot ground rods for each tower leg bonded to the tower and each other. That was the picture we just saw with the ring grounded together. A single 4-foot ground rod. No, remember the magic number is 8 for ground rods. A ferrite core RF choke. That'll prevent RF from getting down and traveling down your coax, but that's not what we're looking at for grounding protection. And connection between the tower base and a cold water pipe is not sufficient ground. You want rods in the ground bonded to the tower. Which of the following is true when installing grounding conductors used for lightning protection? And we're back to the same theme. Sharp bends must be avoided. Direct and short is the kind of connection you want, always with your grounds. You can see that's popped up like 3 times here on the answers. So, which of the following establishes grounding requirements for an amateur radio tower or antenna? You might think it's going to be in the FCC Part 97 rules for amateur radio. It's not. FAA tower, that sounds, oh gosh, towers in the FAA. Well, they have lighting regulations, but we're talking about grounding requirements, not whether you have to have a light on the top of your tower. It's the local electrical codes that you have to follow. That establishes requirements. Recommended practices wouldn't be requirements. Electrical code establishes the requirements. The next 3 questions deal with working on towers. So what is required when climbing an antenna tower? This is kind of common sense. A is have sufficient training on safe tower climbing techniques. That seems reasonable. Use appropriate tie off to the tower at all times. You want to be connected to that tower. Yeah, that makes sense. And always wear an approved climbing harness. And that also makes sense. And that's because all 3 choices are correct. Those are all required safety precautions. Under what circumstances is it safe to climb a tower without a helper or an observer? Cut to the chase, never. Doesn't matter whether you're doing electrical, mechanical work, whether you're 2 feet off the ground or 20 feet off the ground. You should never be climbing a tower without a helper or observer. Simple as that. Which of the following is an important safety rule to remember when using a crank-up tower? Remember, I described what a crank-up tower is. It says, this type of tower must never be painted. Well, that's a total idiotic answer. It has nothing to do with the safety, which eliminates question D as well, since all 3 cannot be correct, because painting the tower is irrelevant. So this type of tower must never be grounded. Well, all towers always need to be grounded. So this type of tower must not be climbed unless it is retracted or a mechanical safety locking device has been installed. That is the correct answer. You don't want the thing to be partially up. The weight of climbing it could cause it to descend suddenly. You want it to either be all the way retracted or somehow mechanically locked to prevent it from retracting at all. And which of the following is an important safety precaution to observe when putting up an antenna tower? Ground strap connected to your wrist at all times. Well, you might be want to using that if you're working on an electronic circuit, but not an antenna tower. So that's going to eliminate D as well. Insulate the base of the tower to avoid lightning strikes. Insulating the base will not avoid a lightning strike. So that's not correct. You want to look for and stay clear of any overhead electrical wires. Again, you're putting up a tower. You don't want to come in contact with a power line. It'll ruin your whole day. Okay, what is the purpose of a safety wire through a turnbuckle used to tension guy lines? This is a little bit of a tough question unless you understand how a turnbuckle works or how they're used. So let's just take a look at one. The answer is prevent loosening of the turnbuckle. You can see here we have a wire going through that hole in the turnbuckle. You use this safety wire to prevent the turnbuckle from twisting or loosening at all, which can happen over time with vibrations. So it doesn't secure the guy line if the turnbuckle breaks. It's just a thin wire. It's not going to have the strength of the guy line. Providing a ground path for lightning strikes, all of this is going to be a path for any lightning that goes down it. And it doesn't have anything to do with measuring or with proper tensioning. It is simply to keep it from loosening up over time. What is the minimum safe distance from a power line to allow when installing an antenna? So anytime you're putting up an antenna, obviously you don't want to come in contact with a power line. So how far away would you need to be so that you don't run a risk of something happening? Well, you don't want to, if the antenna starts to fall over, you don't want it contacting the power line. So the correct answer is D, enough so that the antenna falls, no part of it can come closer than 10 feet to the power wires. That would be the correct answer. Half wavelength at the operating frequency, that's actually a rule of thumb for antenna separations from each other, prevent interference. It has nothing to do with safety from a power line. Having it the height of the power line above ground, you think about it, that really doesn't make any sense as to how close you would have the antenna. You might care about how high the antenna is in relation to the power line, but not how high the power line is above the ground. And then the height of the antenna to the height of the power line and multiplied by a factor of 1.5. That would give you a distance, but it would give you quite a large distance. And basically you want to make sure that if it falls, it's not going to come close enough to the power line. So D is your correct answer. Why should you avoid attaching an antenna to a utility pole? And this is our last question here. It says the antenna will not work properly because of induced voltages. That's not true. 60 hertz radiations from the feed line may increase the well, there aren't going to be any radiations from a feed line, and that wouldn't have anything to do with SWR. So it's not going to be D either, which means the antenna could contact high voltage power lines. That's again what you're concerned about. If you're putting an antenna on a utility pole, there's a power line there, and you don't want to come in contact with it. It's also against the law to do that, and a power company could come and remove your antenna and send you a bill for the work of doing that. So that's another good reason not to do it. So that's the end of these two modules questions. Are there any additional questions on any of them? And I can't see the chat, so if there's something in chat.
So I had a question, John, you noted earlier that this was what, 30 questions out of 120 or something like that?
Out of 412, I believe.
Okay.
The three of them, the three modules, and I've only covered 2 of the 3 modules.
Okay. But is there somewhere a list of how many questions from each topic we could expect to see on a test?
There is such a list. I don't have it. I don't know if anyone else has that readily available. Dave, do you know?
I will find it and put it in chat.
Okay, great, thanks.
It's actually one for each group, and each sub-element has 2 to 4 groups within it. So that
Okay.
might be a little confusing, but when he said T0A and T0B, you can expect one question from each one of those.
Okay.
Well, and I will say when I did the ham study, the learning portion, and I actually, all the questions tonight, I actually remembered the answers to all of them except for one of them, but the pictures make it easier to remember, because some of those I didn't understand. I was trying to memorize the answers, but I didn't understand the concept. So like with the that safety wire, I didn't know what that looked like or anything, so that's very helpful.
Good.
That's all, folks.
All right.
So next up, we're supposed to have JD, but I see he hasn't joined the call yet. He's supposed to do T0C. What we could do is go into the question and answer that session that Dan's doing, and then we could have Dave talk about the scheduling of the tests, and then JD was supposed to be here for the ham radio basics, so we can have him do T0C just before that. So it's a little out of order, but it's best we can do right now.
If he doesn't show up, I do have a thing on module C, but I'll have to go get it, and I could load it up onto those laptop if I have to.
That would be really good, just in case.
Yeah, I'll go away here for a moment and have to go downstairs and put it on a thumb drive and bring it up.
Sounds good. He did say he had something urgent come up this afternoon, so he's hoping to be here at 5. So Dan, do you want to go into taking questions and answers?
Yeah, I have a couple of ways to go about this. If I have a lot of questions, I can just pop up the poll. We can discuss things if the students have a lot of questions. If the students don't have many questions, what I could do, and I just thought about this just an hour ago, is I could go ahead and run up. I have a practice test queued up on here, a regular ham study practice exam. And if the group wants to go through 35 questions to simulate a exam, that would be good too, whatever y'all want to do. Do we have a preference?
We have 4 students, so let's let them answer.
Do we have any specific?
And we do have a full review next week that Frank's doing.
Yeah, I'm still at the point where I don't know what I don't know. So I think going through the practice questions would be most helpful to me personally.
I agree too.
Agreed. Yeah, that most helpful.
And Ray, did Kurt have a preference here? Sounds like a practice test.
Well, let me go ahead and share it out.
Sorry, it wasn't letting me on mute. Kurt said practice test.
Let's go for it.
All right, here we go. Y'all see that? Everybody see it?
Yep.
Okay, so let's go through this. They're going to do 35 questions. Dave will explain this, during his turn, but the process, the way the process goes, it'll look just like this if he's doing the exam. And you'll get a different set of questions drawn out in a proper proportion, but they'll be totally random. So if you're using practice tests, the advice I give, if you use a practice test, be sure that if you pass one, take another one and another one and another one until you get up to, like 90% or better. That way, when you get the one you're actually going to get, you'll have a pretty good assurance of passing it. Anyway, let's move into this. First question is, why is the radio horizon for VHF and UHF signals more distant than the visual horizon? Okay, we'll look at the detractors. Anybody want to offer up an answer for that? Radio.
Sorry. Oh, I'm thinking I remember it being D, but that's just from memory. I don't quite understand the question.
Okay. Well, it's basically relates to the fact that radio waves are just another form of electromagnetic energy at a much lower frequency. And what happens, waves, they tend to, if you watch waves like ripples in a pond, if there's a rock or an island or something, they'll kind of refract around it. And that's exactly what radio waves do. So the answer is D, okay? So that is the correct answer there. Moving on, which of the following can result in a revocation of the station license or suspension of the operator license? Now this has changed a little bit over the years, but email address is top dog now with the FCC. You can use you want to have a correct postal address too, but you can use a PO box now, for instance. You didn't used to do that in the old days. Anyway, the correct answer here out of these four, anybody want to guess before I tell you?
A.
Okay. We'll take A. Okay, what does the scanning function of an FM transceiver do? Check for messages left on a digital bulletin board, tune through the frequencies to check for activities, prevent interference to nearby repeaters, check incoming signal deviation. Well, most of you probably seen scanners. What do scanners do? It's pretty obvious, right?
It'd be B.
Okay. What are the two components of the radio wave? I don't know if you got through this part yet or not. Electric and magnetic fields, voltage and current, impedance and reactance, ionizing and non-ionizing radiation. Maybe you want to hazard a guess?
I'll guess A.
Okay, I'll buy that. What should be the first step to resolve non-fiber optic cable TV interference caused by amateur radio transmissions? Non-fiber optic cable, that's an interesting twist, isn't it? Okay, so this is about your signal getting into some type of a system. First of all, fiber optics do not make an antenna. Antenna has to be made out of a conductor. And what anything is that receives interference is basically an antenna. So let's look at these answers. Add a preamplifier to the TV antenna. That certainly wouldn't do it. Add a high pass filter to the TV antenna. Well, I'm assuming this is HF that you're doing. That's plausible. Be sure all TV feed line coaxial cables are installed properly. And D, add a low pass filter to the TV antenna input. Well, a high pass filter passes higher frequencies, okay? TV signals are typically in the UHF and higher spectrum. And HF's ham station is in the HF spectrum. So if you put a filter on that passes antenna input, that would probably do it. Non-fiber optic cable. So anybody want to guess an answer? High pass?
If I were going to guess, I'd guess C, but I
C?
guess that's not the right answer.
Well, yeah, I'm thinking this because this is a digital signal now. Cable TV, that's a digital signal. And it's usually, I would say C too. The old answer would have been B. Let's go with C. We're going to get this graded at the end here. Okay, 635. Under which of the following circumstances are one-way transmissions by an amateur station prohibited? Okay. Telecommand or transmission of telemetry, all circumstances, international prod or broadcasting.
I remember broadcasting is always prohibited, right?
That's correct, yeah, because you can do telemetry, all circumstances. No, that's not the answer. You can do one of them. International Morse code, you can do that too. In fact, I've done it. So let's go with broadcast. Okay, at which of the following frequencies does maximum permissible exposure have the lowest value? Now we're talking about safety here, basically RF safety. So what do you want to?
You want to just explain this a little bit more, because I don't understand this question.
What is maximum permissible exposure? What is that?
Okay, well, that's the section I think that was going to be covered that we haven't covered. That was the other section today. So we're going to have to kind of get ahead of ourselves here. What this is about, and you'll hear this when we get to that last piece, is that there's regulations regarding exposure to RF energy. RF energy is a form of what causes heating of your tissues. And the amount of heating that occurs is dependent on your body is basically an antenna. And let's say the human's typically 5 to 6 feet tall. So think about what band a wavelength is 5 to 6 feet. What band do you think would be close there?
That's 2 meters. So that's,
Meters. But then again, they don't have that as a choice. So what's the next nearest one?
well, meters relates to frequency as well, right? It's kind of the inverse of that. So
Yeah,
I'm guessing 440 is the 2 meter band, but I don't remember.
that's not, that's 70 centimeters. Yeah, I'm trying to remember, as I say, that this section has not been covered yet. And seeing that 1296 megahertz, I'm going to say, correct me, Dave, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong here. I would say 440.
I would say that's a good guess.
Okay, let's grab that and see what happens. Which amateurs may contact the International Space Station on the VHF band? Okay, there's the keyword VHF. So you should be able to get a pretty good guess at that. What class of license typically has privileges on the VHF band? Well, the answer is we all do, right? Technician, general, and extra.
So it'd be C.
Yeah, you don't need special permission. C would be a technician or husband. That would be the correct answer. Now, from a practical standpoint, just as an aside, usually to make a direct contact, unless you're very lucky, you usually have to be a school or somebody and you get into the program. They used to be able to make contacts, and I think occasionally still do. But typically now you have to make a schedule. But the answer was C there. Okay, what electrical parameter is controlled by a potentiometer? Okay.
So can you explain each of these terms?
Okay.
'Cause-
Okay. But A is that's usually governed by a capacitor. B is field strength. That's not governed by anything really. C is resistance, which is governed by a resistor. And D is inductance, which is covered by an inductor or a coil. So potentiometer, just in case, and I think I covered that in my section, is a variable resistor, like a volume control on a radio or TV. So the answer should be C. Listen. That's just something you're going to have to memorize. Okay, what's meant by the term picket fencing? Okay, now this is kind of in the propagation section and the way the radio waves propagate. Anyone want to hazard a guess there? You heard that term? Well, we'll go through the answers. A type of ground system used with vertical antennas. B, alternating transmissions during a net operation. C, rapid flutter on a mobile signal due to multipath propagation. D, local versus long distance communications. Okay, the answer, believe it or not, I don't know if this was covered, should be C, rapid flutter on mobile signals due to multipath propagation. Okay, moving on. What following types of solder should not be used for radio electronic applications? Tin copper solder, lead tin solder, acid core solder, and rosin core solder.
I remember it was D.
Explanation. What's that?
Rosin core solder is what I remember.
Oh, I
No,
thought,
I
I thought it was
That's,
S.
that's not. It should be. If the word not were in there, then D would be the answer, but the answer is C, acid or acid core, because that's the one you don't want. Again, watch
Oh,
the
that's right.
question carefully. Watch the question carefully. Sometimes it's inverted. Okay. Okay, this goes into what I covered. What formula is used to calculate resistance in a circuit? Okay. R equals I. R equals E divided, or A plus I. R equals E times I. R equals E minus I. Remember that circle we drew? We had the E on top and the I and the R on the bottom. You cover up the missing one. So let's see, the R is on the bottom. So you cover that up, and the top is E divided by I. So it would be A, right? Okay, what's the unit of frequency?
It's gotta be B.
Yeah, A is a brand of car.
Although you can rent a Tesla from Hertz.
Yeah, I guess so. And his are together, that would cost a day, but anyway,
It used to be cycles per second.
yeah. Okay, what's a grid locator? A letter number designator assigned to an azimuth and elevation. An instrument for neutralizing a final answer. That's a possible choice, right? A letter number designator assigned to a geographic location, or an instrument for direction finding. I know I'm in Delta Mike 14, DM 14. Everybody on Earth is in a grid square.
EN 87 up here in Seattle.
Yeah. So the answer is C, a letter number designator assigned to a geographic location. Okay. Under what circumstances is it safe to climb a tower without a helper of the observer? I think this is covered. That's right. We just heard that. So you know how you might get that question on the exam. Which of the following types of antennas offer the greatest gain? Yagi, J-pole, 5/8 wave vertical, or isotropic?
The only one I remember out of the discussion was the Yagi, but I don't remember anything else about it.
Yeah, well, a Yagi is one type. It's not the only type of directional antenna, but a Yagi is a directional antenna. Whereas the J-pole, the vertical, and the isotropic are omnidirectional antennas. And remember with gain, I remember teaching a class years ago. The answer is Yagi, by the way. Gain is like, I think a gain is like a flashlight. I remember I taught a class years ago. We had a neat demo. We took the end off a flashlight. It was one of those mag lights. You can unscrew the reflector in. It left the bulb in there. And you can turn the light on and the bulb, just the naked bulb was hanging out there. That's an isotropic radiator. You screw the reflector back on and you focus it. Now you got a directional antenna, and with the directional antenna, you can shine, hundreds of feet. But the little light bulb, you're lucky to even read a newspaper by it. So that's what gain's about. A Yagi is a type of directional antenna. What signals are used in computer radio interface for digital mode operation?
See?
You're correct. Yeah, when you talk signals, you're talking about the inputs and outputs from the radio. Okay, we're not talking about transmission over the air, at least in the contrast text of this. Okay, how should you respond to a station calling CQ? Now the other station's calling CQ. What do you do if you want to go back? Okay, that's right in the, was probably right in the first lesson. Transmit the other station's call sign, followed by your own. Okay, what term describes the ability of a receiver to discriminate between multiple signals? Again, that's just a memory thing. The answer should be A, selectivity. Sensitivity is how it can pick up a weak signal. What is the purpose of the squelch function? Okay, squelch is the ability to radio to mute out all that hiss that's in the background. This is specific mainly to an FM receiver. So basically what that does is it mutes the audio because FM is very annoying. If you don't have a squelch, you hear all that hiss and noise. So C should be the answer there. What does the abbreviation FET stand for? Again, if you covered your electrical components, that should be D, field effect transistor. Okay, all of these are pretty bogus. Okay, so it's field effect transistor. Which of the following best describes an amateur radio mesh networks? I don't know if this was discussed at all, but that's kind of a way to get data around quickly. Okay, you probably heard that term with home routers where you buy a Wi-Fi router and you might get a couple other little units that you can put in various rooms. And what that does is it repeats the signal from one to the other. So putting that into the context of amateur radio, well, it's not a satellite communications network. Wide bandwidth digital voice mode employing DOR, well, not really. Internet linking protocol used to network repeaters, or an amateur-based data network using commercial Wi-Fi equipment with modified firmware. Thinking it's probably C or D, but the answer is D. I've seen this done, works quite nicely by commercial routers, which by the way happen to overlap the ham bands, pop some new firmware in them, and they'll talk to each other. Okay, which of the following is accurately represented in electrical schematics? Connections, component connections, wire lengths, physical appearance of components, and all of these are correct. Well, I hate to say it, the answer is going to be A. Doesn't do anything. Connections have, it's used, the length of the lines in the schematic have no bearing on what's actually in the circuit. In fact, they could be a single point and it's shown by a line in the schematic. When do FCC rules not apply to the operation of an amateur station? A, when operating under special FEMA rules. B, when operating under special ARES rules. C, when operating a RACI station. And D, FCC rules always apply. See, I'm trying to remember that. I'm pretty sure that except for Mars, which they didn't mention there, I'm pretty sure that because it's an amateur station, they always apply. If anyone wants to correct me, let me know. What is the satellite beacon? Let's see, we've got 10 to go here. Primary transmit antenna on the satellite. Transmission from a satellite contains status information, the reflective surface of a satellite, or an indicator showing light showing where to point your antenna. The answer there is actually it's contained this. It's transmission that contains status, and that information, by the way, is called telemetry, because that might come up on a different question. What should the outer jacket of a coaxial cable be, or why should be the outer jacket of a coaxial cable resistant to ultraviolet light? This is all about the structural integrity. It has nothing to do electrically here. So the answer here is going to be D. Ultraviolet light can damage the jacket and allow water to enter. Okay, because they do deteriorate. Which decibel, this is one I covered, which decibel value represents a power increase from 20 watts to 200 watts? That's a 10-fold increase. Remember what that was? I know I taught this. The answer is going to be B, 10 decibel. So that's a 10 to 1 rule. Who is accountable if a repeater inadvertently retransmits communications that violate the FCC rules? Okay, this is something that changed over the years, but the answer should be I believe it's the control operator of the originating station. Correct me if I'm wrong. We'll find out here in a few minutes. What's the following example of remote control as defined in part 97? Operating the station over the internet. Controlling a model aircraft or car by amateur radio. All of these are correct with repeater operation. Anybody want to hazard a guess on that one?
B.
I'm gonna guess D.
Well, remote. A is considered remote control. B, I would say I would go with C for now and see what that does. What's the major function of an antenna tuner, antenna coupler? It allows the antenna to be used in both receive and transmit. Okay, antenna tuner. I don't know if antenna coupler is really good. It helps the receiver automatically tune in weak stations. It matches the antenna and system impedance to the transmitter output impedance. It automatically selects the proper antenna for the frequency band being used. Okay. Antenna tuner. It should be C. Matches the antenna system impedance to the output impedance. It doesn't match the coaxial impedance to the antenna. It's the rig to the antenna, or rig to the coax actually, or to the antenna. What's a relay? A relay is an electronically controlled switch. As a mechanical one has a coil on it that draws in a physical contact that throws the switch. What type of voice mode is often used for long distance weak signal contacts on the VHF, UHF bands? Okay, keyword is long distance weak signal. Well, the answer is going to be B, SSB. Most VHF only amateur equipment does not include that mode, but the weak signal people use sideband on 2 meters, works great. What's the abbreviation for kilohertz? Okay, it's going to be B, small k, capital H, small c. Okay, almost done here. What hazard exists in a power supply immediately after turning it off? Okay, we just covered that at the end of the last section.
That's gotta be D, yeah.
Yeah, should remember that one. Last one, when is willful interference to other amateur radio stations permitted? I can tell you right now, it's going to be never. So that's your answer. All right, let's see how we did. Oh my God, I missed two. Okay. I kind of think I know which one. That's funny. I thought I answered that one right. That's weird. Wait a minute. Where are they?
Just keep going down until you hit the red ones.
Whoop. Yeah, okay. I bet you, let's see. 50 megahertz. Okay. You know, that's a funny thing because I thought it was 2 meters. That was what I always learned because that's the length of the body. 50 megahertz. Okay, I'd have to actually review that. So that's something to watch. Let's see, what was the other one? Oh, that was the one. Okay, let's see. Operating a station over the internet. Okay, yeah. Okay, the term is radio control model aircraft, not remote. My bad.
Hmm.
Radio control. So that's going on a lot now in the ham bands. There's actually, I don't know if they're still in business. There was a place called, I think, Remote Rig, or where you can actually rent a QTH by the hour.
Yeah,
And
remote ham radio.
remote radio.
Yep.
Okay, so you know, I mean, I missed Goosh. My bad. Are there any other questions? I think
Well,
judging.
thanks for doing that. That was good.
Judging by the conversation, let me stop to share. And judging by the conversation, I'd highly recommend that you, when's the test? When are we doing the exam?
So that's one of our questions for today.
Yeah, because that would be good to know. I'm gonna, I'd be glad to help out. I don't know if Dave's gonna do this all in person or if it's gonna be remote or hybrid.
So Dan, we did get JD show up. He does have the T0C presentation.
You want to let him take it now?
Yeah, I think it'd be a good idea. I'd like to get through those, then we can talk about the exam and then go into the Go Kits.
Well, good. He could talk about that one answer that I missed, the one about the 50 megahertz versus 440. I thought it was 2 meters, quite frankly, but anyway, go ahead.
Hey, Steve. Steve, are you there?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't have any of my paperwork for T0C. So somebody else can get it. I appreciate it.
Okay, because John was gonna pinch hit on that if we needed to, and I think he's had time to load it on his computer now.
Okay, I appreciate that. It's good.
Okay, let me see if I can share this. Okay, so should be the first question 1 should be up there.
Yep.
Okay, what type of radiation are radio signals? Alpha and gamma radiation are what you think about we have a nuclear weapon go off, and there are types of ionizing radiation. So radio signals are, oops, it's not moving. It's my thing moving. There we go. Non-ionizing radiation. So this, not the really dangerous kind. Okay. And which of the following frequencies, we just did this, is the maximum permissible exposure? That's the 150 megahertz, which is your 6 meter band. So that's, I don't have a chart that shows the kind of peaks there. 2 meter is also of concern, more so than the other ones. But the best answer here, I guess, is 50 megahertz. How does the allowable power density for RF safety change if duty cycle changes from 100% to 50%? We got to understand what a duty cycle is. And duty cycle is basically the ratio of the amount of transmit time over total time. So basically, if you're 100% duty cycle, it means it's constant transmission. And 50% would be only half as much. So the allowable power density is going to change because you're transmitting less of the time. It's going to proportionally decrease. So it's going to decrease by 50%. This is really understanding what duty cycle means. So if it's transmitting less, then you're going, then the amount of it's going to change. What factors affect the RF exposure of people near an amateur station antenna? Okay, so the frequency and the power level certainly do. The distance away will affect how much you are, and the radiation pattern. So if you have a directional antenna, and if you're on one of the null lobes where there's no real signal coming out, you're going to be much less exposure than if you're in the direction that the antenna is focusing the energy. So all three of these choices are correct. It's the frequency and the power level, which we just talked about, like with the 50 megahertz being the worst. The more power, the worse the exposure, and the closer you are, the worse the exposure. And then also the radiation pattern also affects it. Why do exposure limits vary with frequency? And we were just talking about that. The human body absorbs more RF energy at some frequencies than at others. That makes sense. Which of the following is an acceptable method to determine whether your station complies with FCC RF exposure regulations? Well, this is one you're just going to kind of have to know. And these are all correct choices. So that's the good news. If you see the one that says, you know, which methods can you do? Just the ones they're giving you are all acceptable. You can calculate it based on the OET Bulletin 65. You can use a computer modeling, and you can do actual measurements. Those are all methods that you can use. Almost everybody does A, but that's okay. What hazard is created by touching an antenna during transmission? Well, RF burn. The video that I was showing where the guy kept touching things and getting burned, remember he said he didn't get electrocuted, but he got an RF burn? There you go. RF burn to the skin. Which of the following actions can reduce exposure to RF radiation? Okay, well, can you relocating the antenna? Well, yeah, if the antenna is farther away from you, you're not going to be exposed as much. If you relocate the transmitter, that's really not going to do anything, because it's the RF energy is coming out of the antenna. So moving the transmitter doesn't do you any good. Increasing the duty cycle would actually increase the amount of radiation because you're transmitting more. So that's incorrect. And of course, all of the above can't apply. So the only answer that would be correct is relocate antennas. How can you make sure your station stays in compliance with RF safety regulations? Well, they're talking about staying in compliance. So that implies that something may change. Well, you can inform the FCC of changes, but does that make sure you stay in compliance? No. You need to reevaluate the station when you change something in it. And of course, because A was wrong, D couldn't be right. And making sure your antennas have low SWR doesn't have anything to do with the RF safety. So you have to reevaluate. And there's an online calculator in the ARRL website that'll help you do that. Why is duty cycle one of the factors used to determine RF radiation exposure levels? We kind of already talked about that, because it takes into account how much exposure you have over time based on the amount of transmission, right? So it affects the average exposure. The peak won't change, but the average will. Okay. What is the definition of duty cycle during the averaging time for RF exposure? Well, we just talked about that it's the percentage of time that a transmitter is transmitting. So it's the amount of transmission time over the total time. It's a percentage of time. And it's the time that it's transmitting, not that it's off, which would be D. So it's on duty, it's sending something out. How does RF radiation differ from ionizing radioactivity? Ionizing radiation or radioactivity. Okay. RF radiation does not have sufficient energy to cause chemical changes in cells and damage DNA. It doesn't mean that RF radiation is perfectly safe. we talked about getting a burn from that, and you can have other problems from overexposure to RF radiation. And radiation, RF radiation limited in range to a few feet. That's not true. It can be quite a good amount of distance, depending on the frequency and the power and so forth. And RF radiation can only be detected with an RF dosimeter. No, that's mixing terminology together there. That's gobbledygook. Who is responsible for ensuring that no person is exposed to RF energy above the FCC exposure limits? Well, not the FCC. They set the limits. And a person who's walking by, that's not their responsibility. Local zoning board's got nothing to do with any of this. It is the station licensee. It's you and your station. You are responsible for ensuring that you are not exposing people improperly to RF energy. I don't know what that is. That's the end. That was it.
Super. Has anybody got any questions there?
Out of that.
So Dave, over to you to talk about logistics. And remember, we still have the review session next week that Frank's going to be doing. So he'll be going, and I don't know what format he's going to use, whether he's just going to review all the sections or he's going to just hit the hard ones that people want to have come up. So it's, unless he'd like to get on and explain how he's going to do it.
Wait, Richard. Steve, this is Frank. I've been thinking that basically it'd be more of a Q&A session. I mean, I can go through and do a general review, but in an hour, that's going to be pretty hard to do.
Well, you actually have 2 hours because we don't have any hammering the basics next week.
2 hours. I mean, I can go through everything in 2 hours, but it's going to be fast and it'll probably be too fast for most people. On the other hand, I can go through each section and see if people have questions about that section, which is what I was really planning on doing.
That sounds good to me. I mean, you could hit the tough questions, the ones that are hard for people to remember.
Yes. And I'll basically use Jack Tilley's manual for that.
Sounds good. Okay, over to Dave to talk about the testing part of it.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so before we go there, I want to ask the one question about the number of questions for each, the number of questions in the question pool for each subject area that we looked at. So just a quick thing. So let me share my screen here. And then we'll talk exams. All right, so let's. So this is the way the question pool is organized. As John mentioned, there are 412 questions in the pool, and they're organized into a series of study areas and then groups. So T1, T stands for technician. T1 is and there's 10 areas, is on FCC regulations. It has 67 questions in it. And it then has 6 subject areas inside that study area, which means that there are 6 questions on the exam, because you'll notice as you add up all of the questions, the number of subject areas, it just happens to be 35. So this is how we know that you're going to have a certain number of questions in a particular area. So for example, safety that we just did has 3 subject areas. So 3 of the questions on the exam will be on safety. Now the number of questions that are in each subject areas ranges between 11 and 14. Which one of those 11 to 14 you don't know. So that's the randomness part of the question pool. Okay, so that's how you can figure that out. And Each question is uniquely numbered, and you can tell from the question number which topic area and which subject area it is, and then which question number within that particular subject group. So this is why when we've been going through with the numbers for you, why we've been giving you each one of the question numbers. Okay, so that's how you can figure out what's happening. So that's all I had for that. This is what we went over last week, which is, does everyone see this slide? Any of the instructors want to tell me whether or not you can see it? It's just me? Am I just talking to myself? Okay.
I can see it.
I see it. Looks like you're good.
So these are the online exams. Since everybody is spread out all over the country, I assume what we're going to be doing is online exams rather than actually getting together to do an exam here in the West Seattle area. Is that a correct assumption for all the students?
Most correct. I don't mind traveling, but it's short notice.
Okay. Alrighty, so here are the various online exams that are given through the end of the month. The sessions that are marked AE7TD are mine. We do have one exam if someone is comfortable in Spanish and would prefer to take the exam in Spanish. We do have one exam September 25th, that Sunday, that will be given online but in Spanish if there's any particular candidates that would prefer to do that. So what I'd like to do is to have each one of the students kind of go through and tell me when they think they would like to be able to take the exam. If there was enough interest, if we wanted to have an exam directly for us, we had planned to do an exam on September 24th. There is already an exam, online exam, that's scheduled in the evening Pacific time. But we could also run one directly for ourselves if that schedule fits everyone better. But an online exam is an online exam. I don't think it makes any difference to which exam session you're going to. These are all online exams that are offered by Clark. So they will have pretty much the same look and feel, the same exam fee. The same fee waivers are going to be given at all of these exams if you fall into any of those categories. So Steve, is it possible to go through and poll the students to find out where they sit as far as being ready for an exam?
Yeah, sure. Let's kick off with Kurt, and he's there with Ray Smith.
And Kurt had to step out for a minute. In talking about it, we believe he's ready, but he wants to go back over some of the videos that we've recorded, and but yeah, I think he's ready.
For which one?
Yeah, but which format?
Oh,
Does he want an in-person there, or does he want the online format?
that's a good question. I think he's prepared to do either. He is here at the COI with me every Wednesday, so he could do it here, but he's also prepped for online as well.
Okay, so the next question, and when he comes back in, is which session?
Yes. Let me find out and I'll get back to you.
Okay, let's move down to Kathy.
I do not feel ready. I would have to say probably the 26th or the 30th.
Okay.
'Cause I still need to, I've only done the test one time. I've been doing the study part, so I have gone through all the questions now, but I haven't tried a retest yet, but I did not pass it the first time I tried it, but now I've gone through all the questions, so I don't know.
How about your significant other?
I know I seriously doubt he will be ready. He has been, his workload has increased, so I don't think he's been studying as much as I have. So I would have to ask him.
Okay. If it makes it the 26th exam, the after. Kathy, you want yourself?
I'm sorry, you're cutting out.
So could you? Thank you. There you go. So the 26th exam is in the afternoon. So that's Monday afternoon. It's at 2 p.m. Pacific time, which would make it 5 p.m. East Coast time. So that's when the exam for the 26th is. The exam for the 30th is an evening exam. So it starts at 6 p.m. Pacific time, which would make it 9 p.m. Eastern time. So just to make sure the time zones line up for you.
Then I would say the 26th because I'll probably be tired by 9 o'clock.
All righty. Okay, Steve, the next student.
Lila,
Hey there. I'm Central Time Zone, so I'm thinking either the 26th or pardon me, the 30th. Both of those work days for me are absolute crazy. So actually let's try for goodness gracious. Let's try for the 26th.
Okay, Central Time. You're looking at 4 p.m.
No, then no, I thought
For the 30th, then that's our evening session. That's the one that would be I guess 7 p.m. No, 8
8
p.m.
p.m.
8 p.m. Central Time.
okay. What is the 24th? That Saturday? What time would that one?
Yeah, that right now the AD4VE is in the evening, so that would so that again I think would be I think they're an hour earlier, so they would be 7 p.m.
7 p.m.
Central.
Okay. I'm thinking, I'm sorry. Huh? Yeah, let me tentatively stay on the 30th. And I'll look and make sure got some life stuff going on here. So I want to make sure I don't put it on a weekend when we're moving people.
Okay, I will put into chat the URL that you can go to that lists all of these.
Okay.
And into the beginning of October also. I'll put that in chat as soon as we're done here before we go to the next topic.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Okay, and Jim?
This is Ray. Can I jump in ahead of him? Kurt was
sure.
asking what time was the one on the 23rd?
23rd is a Friday evening Pacific Coast time. So you're probably looking at 7 or 8. Well, what time zone?
He's
Pacific.
here.
Pacific? Yeah, I believe that's in the evening. So you're probably looking at 5, 6 o'clock Pacific time.
Okay, thank you.
And Dave, how long are the tests?
That depends on how to answer the questions. If you come in nice and early for an early check-in, which we recommend our East Coast and Central Time folks to come in early, half an hour early on this session, then you can get through in 10 minutes if you can answer the exam in 10 minutes. If you're a very slow test taker and you're worried and you go back and check your answer 2 or 3 times, which I don't necessarily recommend checking more than once, then it could take you a half an hour. It depends on you. There's no time limit placed on it.
Okay.
It's going to be probably the same speed as the online practice tests.
Yeah, I mean, you can take a practice test and time yourself in your practice test to see how long it takes you. There's some preliminary work that we do to check your room. We use your webcam to look around the room, make sure nobody's there, make sure you don't have any notes up on the walls, things like that. And that probably takes 10, 15 minutes, and then you're into a testing room. And then it's however long it takes you to take the exam. We use Zoom breakout rooms if you've ever done that before.
So Jim, how's it look for
Yeah.
you?
I could do the 26th, 2:00 Pacific time.
Very good.
So Dave, it looks like no special session is necessary for this group.
That looks good to me. We have, plenty of opportunities here. And if you it's no big deal if you are not able to pass, just sign up for the next one. It may take another exam fee for you to take your next exam, but we had somebody, $10. It doesn't work for you, another day, take another $10. There's no time limit if you don't pass.
Okay,
So
any
how
other
do I
questions?
register
We need
for
to
the
get
exam?
back over to JD for the Go Kits.
All righty, and I'll put that URL in chat now.
Thank you. JD, you're up.
Hello, everybody hear me?
I can hear you. I see the radio.
Okay. Gonna do this with a small camera. This is a gator box, 2 feet by 18 inches. And I think I got it out as far as I can get it. Up at the top right hand, there's a lamp that we can use for when we're scatter everything out, then we can see something that we can write with. This is a dual light, comes in white and red, so you cut back on the amount of intensity. Over here, we got the volt net meter. This is the primary on-off switch for everything. Blow everything on the bottom. FT991 Yaesu. It's a HF and VHF UHF. So we can cover everything with that one antenna or one radio. Right beside it, you see auto tuner. And above that is the there's the 2 meter tin wood that's used for TNC. And TNC is right over here. There. It's hard to do this while I'm watching it too. We can just hook up a regular antenna like this, throw it outside, and start making 2 meter contacts that way. But you can get we have an end-fed antenna that we use that will that we use for HF. try and get this turned around so it show the back of it. Okay, the back. There's all your connections for your UHF, VHF, TNC, the HF. So have everything all there. Over here, you can see the fuse box. It's got primarily 4 different ones for the 4 components that are in here. Next to that, this is a switcher, so that when we run off of shore power and shore power kicks off, then the 12-volt power will kick in. And all this is grounding. And up here in the switcher, that's when they'll hook up for a 12-volt battery. Any questions so far? Let's wait till it's something. One thing that we put in here is a little shelf. That way we can keep the FCC rules. We keep our Nifty for the radio. When you get radios for yourself, Nifty manual is always good to have for programming and finding out certain things about your radio that you need to know.
So JD, will you go over how you use this kit and also what approximate cost it is?
I can't remember the cost. I'm trying to think what it was. I want to say in the neighborhood of 500. I'm not sure on that.
Oh, it's got to be a lot more than that. The Gator case alone's a couple hundred.
Well, they got the Gator case on sale, and it was down below $50 when they bought it.
Is that a V71A, the Kenwood?
I think it is.
And those used to be very, very consistently about 345. In the last year, they've gone up $100, and they kind of seem to be sticking there now for no
Yeah.
particular reason.
So we probably say 750. Depending on if you get things on sale or high use items.
What kind of TNC is that? It's not a Cantronics. What is it?
Time Wave,
A time wave? Okay.
Time Wave PK96.
Is that a 6U Gator case?
I'm not sure which model this one is. Let's see if I can find it real quick.
Yeah, back up a little bit. I think we can figure it out.
More importantly, how heavy is it? When I've seen people go to Gator cases like that, it can quickly get up to 50 and 60 pounds.
Yeah, that one can be handled by one person, but I prefer having 2 people do it. Besides, a little bit better having 2 than 1.
So that to me looks like a 12U case because the V71A is on a 2U slot and there's like a bunch of slots below it. 4 slots.
There's all these slots that are available to have the pretense for it. So you actually could put in no shelf here, but that's not needed with the radio rate. This shelf we put in here specifically so that we could have the books and everything ready for use.
If I'm not mistaken, I think that those Gator cases have covers for both sides.
Yes, it does. Yeah, that makes it real easy.
And technically, I don't think they're waterproof.
No, I don't believe so
TMV
either.
71s are great radios. We've got 2 of them.
Yeah. It's the bottom shelf. It's the HF and the altitude.
So JD, do you have another case there, or is just the one go kit?
Just this one for
Okay.
now. Yeah, we got
Looking at
plans
the-
on building another one.
Looking at the price, that FT 991 is about $1,200.
There's,
I mean, with this kit to buy everything new has got to be about $3,000.
yeah. I agree with that.
Yeah, it's
But I
not
just-
500, it's more like 3,000, yeah.
Yeah, I just know that we didn't put a whole
more.
lot into it. Okay, any questions? All right. I'm done, Steve.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody have anything else? If not, we'll go ahead and let everyone go.
I don't have any other questions.
Okay, well, thank everybody, and we'll see you next week for the review.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Hey, Steve, I've got a quick question, Steve.
Oh, go ahead.
Thank you.
Just
Uh,
a logistics question.
Ray, you could probably cut the recording now.